Let me begin this morning by showing you the Art Scroll Volume 1. You can see it's pretty thick. This is 1 to 72 of Art Scroll. Art Scroll is the go-to book for people in the Orthodox community. And I'm going to share a contrast today between a traditional reading and a non-traditional reading. The traditional readings or the commentaries in this book tend to be 16th century or before. So if you go in an Orthodox synagogue, even to Beth Jacob or to Chabad, and you pick up their commentaries for their Bibles, the commentaries are the classic rabbis of the Middle Ages, starting, with Rashi, who is the 11th century, 1040 to 1105, and moving forward. And those classic commentaries, they have kind of a historical lens. They tend to read when it says for David, a prayer of David, as literally a prayer of David. That's kind of a starting point. And there tends to be a pietistic orientation. This is somebody with total faith in God who is humble. But that's not necessarily how others read it. A post, if you will, medieval perspective is that the Psalms are a collection of poems to God. David, being a writer of such poetry, is identified as a source of authority and authenticity, but that they're largely written by Levites. The Levites had the job in the time of the temple to greet the pilgrims with song. They were composers of song. They were the orchestra. And that Psalms, not necessarily early on into the Second Temple. In fact, many scholars would say largely the Second Temple is when the Psalms were written. In that regard, today's Psalm 17, is understood in two almost contradictory ways. One, and they both build off of the last line of yesterday. Psalm 16, verse 11, read as follows: "You make known to me the path of life, overflowing with joy before your presence. Delights are in your right hand, enduringly." For the classic commentators, that's a description of the world to come. So that David is yearning in the world to come to experience in an enduring way God's presence. For more contemporary scholars of the Bible, it's often in the present tense, meaning back to that key verse of verse 8, Shaviti, Adonai lenegdi tamid, I will always place Yud He Vav He before me. In doing so, you will be at my right hand. And that culminates with this sense of joy. You make known to me the paths of life, overflowing with joy before your presence, delights in your right hand enduringly. Now, the Psalms do not necessarily get placed in any historic way. We don't know always what the thinking was in terms of how they're ordered, but specifically verses 16 and 17 are often linked by commentators. So the classic commentator to the Psalm, whose name I keep repeating as is the most relied on commentator in the Art Scroll, is Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi. He again lives in France, 1160 to 1235. It's roughly the same time as Maimonides in Spain, Radak. And Radak sees Psalm 17 as by David. And with 16, he has expressed his closeness to God at a certain point in his life. But now Psalm 17 for Radak is the moment where David is guilt-ridden over Bathsheba and her husband Uriah. You remember the story where David has had intimate relations with Bathsheba. She becomes pregnant. Uriah comes home, and Uriah says, I can't sleep with my wife. all my comrades are still fighting. I can't indulge in that kind of pleasure. And so David, in desperation with a pregnant lover, says to the general, send Uriah to the front line where he will surely die. And so General Yoav does so. And now that for David Kimchi is Psalm 17. Namely, God, look at me, I am awful. That's the classic understanding. We'll see it in this verse in a moment. You've probed my heart and found it wanting. You also know that I have felt awful about that. I've acknowledged I was wrong. Bring me back. So that's one way. Here's a very different understanding. And I quote my friend Martin Cohen, who has a book of commentaries on Psalms, a little bit more free-form translations. He says, this is a Levite. That's what he said yesterday also, right? Yesterday he saw it as the Levites against the Kohanim. Today it's the Levites against the rich, which could be the Kohanim. But this is a Levite who is being harassed, according to Martin Cohen, because he has a radical understanding, which is not radical to us in our mode, but was radical in the time of the temple, or radical in the Middle Ages, which is, I can see God's face. I have lived a life of integrity. So this is the confident, not the vulnerable poet who says, I want to see you, God, now in your fullness. And I shared in the most recent message another contemporary scholar of Psalms, Rabbi Benjamin Siegel, says Psalm 17 was excluded from the liturgy precisely because of the hubris of the last line, which is, show me your face, God, which not even Moses, when he requested it, was worthy of doing directly. And so this Psalm 17 I love precisely because of these two opposite readings. And for me, as a reader, I can accept both as being different moods of reading the same words. The same words can have, in context of our own needs, a different resonance. But again, what I love about teaching this class, I had never read Psalms this closely. I never knew that the same psalm could be read so oppositely. So in this case, and distinctly, Psalm 17 I've provided with some alternative translations for some key verses to highlight. One last thing before I read it in English, and that is, as I've shared before, part of the challenge of translation in Hebrew is that there's only two tenses and not three, right? There's only perfect and imperfect. And perfect is past to present, imperfect is present to future. So as we'll see, and sometimes the imperfect can be used for the perfect, which is to say you never know the tense. And that's the key difference. Is the psalmist saying, I am confident, or let me be confident in the future? That's, of course, a vastly different mindset. So let me now read my translation, which I struggled with more than any translation to this point. I struggled with this one because of these issues of tense and some of the images used. Psalm 17. A prayer of David. Hear, Adonai, justice. Attend to my joyful song. Give ear to my prayer of lips with no deceit. From before you, let my judgment come. Let your eyes behold uprightness. You have probed my heart. You have remembered me at night. You have tested me and found nothing wrong in me. I have muzzled to let nothing pass my mouth. As for the doings of humanity, by the words of your lips, I have guarded myself from the ways of the unbounded. My steps have held fast to your paths, so that my feet did not stumble. I have called upon you, for you answer me, O God. Incline your ear to me. Hear my speech. Wondrous are your mercies. You who save by your right hand those that take refuge in you from assailants. Guard me as the apple of the eye. In the shadow of your wings, shelter me. From the wicked who oppress me, my deadly enemies who encircle me, their hardened fat shuts them. With their mouth they speak arrogantly. At our every step they have now surrounded us, their eyes fixed on us to cast us down to the earth. Like a lion that is eager to tear in pieces, like a young lion lurking in secret places. Arise, Adonai, confront them, cast them down. Deliver my soul from the wicked with your sword, from people who by your hand, Adonai, from people who share in this life is fleeting, and whose belly you have filled with your treasure, who have children in plenty, and who leave their abundance to their young children. As for me, with justice, may I behold your face. May I be satisfied with a wakeful vision of you. So verses 14 and 15, again, these things build, and often the last line is either the culmination or a surprise. Verse 14 describes his enemy. And in that sense, there's a pattern to this psalm. It's the psalmist prompted by a danger. Somebody is threatening him. Verse 14 indicates that he's threatened by the rich and the powerful, who by your hand, God, you have given them, although that life is fleeting, you have filled their belly with treasure, lots of children, and they will have so much left when they die that even their young children will be able to inherit well. Let me back up to verse 10. Chel v'amo sagru, their hardened fat shuts them. Shuts them meaning their hearts. Their heart is encased by fat because they are gluttons. With their mouth they speak arrogantly. Again, these powerful physical images of the other. And in contrast, verse 15, ani, right? Ani, as for me, I, b'tzedek, with justice, may I behold your face. May I be satisfied with the wakeful vision of you. I, in contrast to those fat cats, I know that what really matters is the spirit of your presence. That's in this fleeting life what is enduring. That's what I want. But here's again, that loaded phrase, Echezeh panecha, may I see your face. Now, panecha can be literally your face. It can be a metaphor for your presence. It can be simply an immediacy of experience. But there's an added piece. Esba'a v'hakitz tumunatecha. May I be satisfied with a vision of you. And the word hakitz means an end. It can be the end of sleep. That's how it's often used. Or it can mean without sleep, meaning wakeful. I chose the word wakeful because it's a word used in meditation popularly, to see things wakefully with open eyes. But for others, it can be, may I see you again, hakitz, at the end of this life, wakefully in the next life. So let me show you a couple of translations that highlight the tension. Look at verse 3. You have probed my heart. You have remembered me at night. You have tested me and found nothing wrong in me. I have muzzled to let nothing pass my mouth. That's very self-confident. That's one way to read it. And it's the way that Robert Alter, who did his translation, literature professor from Berkeley, it's similar to my friend Martin Cohen. But Mitsuda's another favorite translation of mine. It's a little one out of Israel that I like. It's often similar to Art Scroll, but a bit different, the Metsuda. So it's classic, more classic Jewish. You have examined my heart. You have inspected it in the night. Okay, that part's the same. You have tested me, and you did not find, and then he puts in parentheses, what you sought, meaning you sought to find goodness in my heart, but you didn't. That's built on a commentary of Rashi, in which Rashi will say, David says, don't, when you looked into my heart, you found me lacking. And so the last part, my presumptuous thoughts will no longer pass my mouth. That's looking to the future. You looked at my heart, it was lacking. God, forgive me. Going forward, I will be better. It all depends on the grammar. It all depends. Do you read it in the future tense, right? In the future tense, no thoughts will pass my mouth wrongly, or they never passed my mouth. That's why I'm worthy of your presence. So you can see verse 3, you can circle it as a pivot. Is it that of mea culpa, forgive me, or is it of confidence? God, even at night, I've struggled, you've seen me, but I'm good. And verse 4 doesn't give you an indication, because verse 4 is, as for the doings of humanity, by the word of your lips, it can either be, I've guarded myself from the bounds, from the ways of the unbounded, which can also be translated as the violent, or it can be in the future tense. And last, in terms of alternatives, verse 15. Now, that's the punchline, the controversial punchline. As for me, with justice may I behold your face. So a word about beholding God's face. Exodus chapter 33, verse 18. That's the key moment where God says, this is after in Ki Tisa, God has forgiven the people for the golden calf. In that sense, Moses, who was the intervener, who said, God, you got to let them off the hook. You're going to get bad press if you destroy them in the desert. They're going to say you took them out from Egypt to kill them. God relents. And after that job is done, Moses turns to his own needs and says to God, Har'eni na kavodecha, show me please your glory, right? Show me your immediacy. And God responds in verse 20, you are not able to see panai, my face. A person cannot see me and live. And then in verse 23, God will say, turn and I will place my palm and you will see my back, but ufanai lo yera'u, but my face you cannot see. And the classic commentators will say that the interpretation, for instance, Khatam Sofer will say, you can't see God directly, you can only see the impact of God in the world. That's God's back, where God has been. So you can only see God after the fact. You can't demand to see God and with that, the future. So, and yet, Exodus 33:11, we're told that God spoke to Moses face to face when God will describe a relationship. And in Numbers, after Miriam gossips about her brother, God will say, it's not the same I prophecy with you as it is with Moses. Pe el pe adaber bo. I speak to him mouth to mouth. So related image, a quality of immediacy. Of course, you can read these things literally. Some do, sadly for Maimonides and others, because God doesn't have a body. These are, of course, metaphors with the immediacy of seeing God directly. So the last piece to share, and that's these alternative translations of verse 11. Metsuda. As for me, in righteousness I will behold your presence. I will be satisfied when I awake with your likeness. And that's distinctly the world to come. In contrast, Robert Alter, As for me, in justice I behold your face. I take my fill, wide awake, of your image. That's the present. That's immediacy. And I'd like to throw in King James Version only because in our larger world of literature, it often feels like the Bible. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Probably more like Mitsuda referring to the world to come when I awake, though it could be in the morning, but probably understood into the future. Rabbis like Benjamin Siegel say our references, if you remember yesterday's as well, with reference to going into the grave, is not focused on what happens in the world to come, at least on the immediate level. That's not a primary focus of the Bible. That doesn't occur historically till the rabbinic period, where all of Israel have a place in the world to come. That's not so much part of the biblical motif, which is don't cast me to the grave, keep me alive, is more the focus. And hence, in sum, this psalm can be read, and I find it exciting, as this psalm of confidence and yearning. It's a dangerous world. The people with the money have the power. And Martin Cohen says, even in our own time, it's our challenge to faith. How is it that people who seem to be succeeding can be so bad in behavior, immoral in behavior? And that this is a psalm about asserting that what really matters is to be in God's presence, but takes it one step further. And that's the confidence that leading a good life enables the experience of God fully now. And that sense, not unlike Shaviti of yesterday, by placing God always before me, you are there in my right hand, and the end of Psalm 16, and therefore my life is rejoicing. And yet, this psalm tends to be understood less so by Robert Alter, more so by my framing it as may I, as a confidence and yet a yearning of may I now experience you more fully, panim, see your face, the fullness of your presence, rather than being a statement of hubris. It's not that I am seeing your face, I am experiencing you. I have confidence in my goodness, and I have confidence that striving to be with you is what really matters in life. With that, for Psalm 17, we have 5 minutes. Anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment of what moved you? Well, let me remove Eric, remove the text. Let me see everybody so I can see if somebody is waving to want to add something. So let me just add.
Mimi would like to say something.
Mimi?
Yes, in reading that last verse, because with your translation was may I, which would, and I gather that's several of your references, and 2 of them were in the future, and Robert Alter's was in the present. And so if we put them all together, it gives us a whole package of finding the God's face.
Well said.
Or the evidence of God's face, as God may prefer.
Well said, Mimi, that ultimately what is part of the power of poetry are more than one simultaneous reading. To some degree, it's about where we are when we're reading it, our own needs and mood. And this can be past, present, or future. And I think that's well said. I will add, when I see Rabbi Podwell, I'm reminded of his having linked one of our Psalms. And so I want to point out that verse 8, guard me as the apple of the eye, that's the pupil, and the way our eyelids protect our eyes. So that's the notion or an image, a physical image of God being protective of us like the pupil of our eye. In the shadow of your wings, conceal me or shelter me. In that regard, that line is said every night traditionally before going to sleep as part of the prayer of Shema Alamitah, the bedtime prayer. So although Psalm 17 did not enter the liturgy, that one line did. And I would add, for somebody who knows the Psalms well, this triggers an association to the fuller message of the Psalm, which, however one reads it, past, present, or future, clearly with verse 14 and 15 combined, it's a statement of, I know, God, that your presence is what matters, rather than all the material goodness that you enable. Any other a closing comment or question? We still got 2 minutes. All right, so I don't see a hand. Let me just point out in terms of language, closing comments, the artistry of the poet. Verse 14, I keep coming back to verse 14, which is those who have big appetites. The word is yisbu'u, vanim, their children have plenty. They will be greatly satisfied. And then verse 15, the same word is used. Esba'ah, but I will be satisfied with your likeness. Likewise, 14 and 15, there is body language. They fill their stomachs, but I seek your face. And an envelope. The word tzedek appears in verse 1 and verse 15. That's the envelope for this psalm, and that is justice or righteousness. It opens with, Hear Adonai, what is right? And it concludes with, as for me, in righteousness may I behold. And so righteousness, if you will, are the handles of what comes in the middle, which is the yearning for God's presence. I look forward, does anybody have Kaddish to say today? All right, if we don't, again, I delight in having this opportunity to learn a psalm a day with you. Next week, 18, 19, and 20, which means the following week we get up to Psalm 23, which may be the most famous of the Psalms. And then that'll lead to Psalm 24, which is the parallel to Psalm 15 that we looked at this week. Thank you for having come together. Have a good day. Shabbat Shalom.